Okay, thank you very much for everybody's participation and attendance here today. We're very privileged to have some distinguished guests to talk about the vital role of sustainable palm oil in China's future nutritional needs. We have about 1.5 hours or 1.25 hours, forgive me, to discuss this topic, where we will explore some of the current trends in the consumption of palm oil in China and look in detail at some of the qualitative aspects of sustainable palm oil consumption compared to other edible oils, and how it can play a significant role in meeting vital sustainable development goals. And we'll look at the role of palm oil in addressing China's growing demands and health needs and issues of the Chinese consumer. Firstly, I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance, particularly our key speakers. It's my privilege to introduce, we have Sri Datuk Dr. Yusof Basiron, the Executive Director of the Council of Palm Oil Producing Countries, who will give some opening remarks. And then we have three very distinguished doctors and professors. Professor Sun Guiju, the Professor of Nutrition at Southeast University in China, Datuk Dr. Sundram, an expert, very long-standing, renowned expert representing CPOPC, and Dr. Puspo, who's head of the Southeast Asian Food and Agricultural Science and Technology Center. Next slide, please. Our session today, after some introductory remarks, we'll hand over to the panelists, Professor Sun, Dr. Sundram, and Dr. Puspo, and then we'll also have some time for a Q&A and a discussion. So if you can click on your screen and add any questions into the Q&A or the chat box as we go through the session, we will collect those questions and ask them back to the panelists and the respondents at the end during that 15-minute Q&A and discussion time. And then we'll have some closing remarks and we'll wrap up at 3:45 China time. Next slide, please. What we'd like to do to introduce the topic and maybe get us all thinking about palm oil is ask some relatively general questions about palm oil, and you can fill in the box and answer a very short poll of 5 questions, which will help us understand your current knowledge of the palm oil industry and the benefits of palm oil. Pippin? So here are the 5 questions. Please just tick the box. The first question is multiple choice. Can you identify items that contain palm oil? So you can tick more than one box or none. And then, how are we doing? I'll give you a few more seconds to answer these questions. Please tick them. The second question, palm oil is currently the only vegetable oil industry to have a mandatory certificate program scheme globally. Is that yes or no, or maybe? Third question, China's consumption of palm oil has significantly increased in the past decade. Yes, no, or maybe? Fourth question, palm oil is one of the most sustainable sources of vegetable oil for our ever-increasing global population. Yes, no, or maybe? And then final question, how would you rate your awareness of palm oil on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest? Quite simple and straightforward questions that also help us get some feedback from you in terms of the level of awareness of the palm oil industry sector. please do fill in the poll, and we will collect the results. Are we going to show the results now, Vipin, or should we carry on and then show the results near the end?
Yeah, we are doing good. More than 62% participation. So we can show the results if it's okay. If you know, the remaining people would want to participate, that's okay, or we can end the poll.
Let's end the poll,
Okay,
because I'm really keen to speak to the
yes.
distinguished speakers. Well, that's pretty clear. Everybody knows that palm oil, I think the palm oil is used in all of the above, which is fantastic. Number 2 question. 79% said yes, it's currently the only sector that has a mandatory certification scheme. 89% said China's consumption of palm oil has significantly increased in the past decade. 95% said palm oil is one of the most sustainable sources of vegetable oils for our ever-growing population. And then a mix of 2, 3, 4, and 5 in terms of levels of awareness, with a sort of average around 3 to 4. Great. With that, maybe we can move to the next slide, Vipin. And maybe I could just summarize some of the key points that you may or may not know about palm oil. Firstly, palm oil is used in close to 50% of the packaged products that we find in our supermarkets across a wide range of products, including food products like cookies and chips and instant noodles, all the way through to household products like shampoo, soaps, toothpaste, and cosmetics. Palm oil is currently the only vegetable oil industry that has the mandatory certification programs, with the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil and the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil, 2 mandatory certification schemes from the major producing countries. Palm oil contains 11 SDGs, including economic growth, poverty alleviation, enhanced food security, and alternative energy. So it's a very positive contributor to global SDG goals. And finally, oil palm is one of the highest yielding available crops, requiring 8 times less land and producing up to 20 times more oil compared to other vegetable oils. Next slide. Firstly, now it's my great pleasure to introduce Tan Sri Datuk Dr. Yusof, the Executive Director of CPOPC, to give some opening remarks for this discussion today. Dr. Yusof.
Thank you, our moderator, Mr. Jeff Esther. Good afternoon to all distinguished speakers and participants. Welcome once again to another webinar series by the Council of Palm Oil Producing Countries in partnership with EPCO. Our webinar for today is titled The Vital Role of Sustainable Palm Oil in China's Future Nutritional Needs. It is great pleasure of mine to speak for and on behalf of the Council of Palm Oil Producing Countries, or CPOPC, during this event, and it is an honor to welcome everyone this afternoon who have dedicated their time to listen to sustainable palm oil experts from China, Indonesia, and Malaysia. We do this engagement webinars in order to provide after-sales service or services to Chinese customers who have been loyally importing palm oil all these years. We do this to increase awareness, especially on the positive attributes of palm oil, so that the consumers and customers will enjoy with more confidence when they consume palm oil as a dietary product. We are of course keen to avoid or prevent negative misinformation from being perceived as truth. And so, as in the survey, awareness is very important for us to impart to our customers, those consuming palm oil. I would like also to thank my fellow speakers, as mentioned by our moderator, for their generous time in sharing with us their knowledge this afternoon. I promise you they are very knowledgeable about what they are going to speak about. It is very pleasing to know that China's consumption of palm oil has grown significantly in the past 2 decades at about 240%. High consumption rate is not just mere figures. The percentage represents the China's market level of trust in the benefits of palm oil, thus embracing it into their food industry. As you all may know, palm oil is a vegetable oil that is rich in vitamins, in which our speakers will happily elaborate during today's session. I hail the current China's policy to prevent genetically modified GM products from being consumed, and this is where it is not applied to palm oil. It is scientifically believed that food with GMs are not the preferred choice. Palm oil, however, is non-GMO, trans-fat-free, and more affordable compared to other vegetable oils. It is also sustainable, environmentally friendly crop. Palm oil serves 40% of the global demand for vegetable oils, requiring only 6% of the usage of land for vegetable oil crop cultivation. Other vegetable oils such as soya and rapeseed require 4 to 10 times more land to produce the same quantity of oil. Thus, both producing and consuming countries of palm oil are considered to be consistent in their efforts in gaining goal number 12 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, or SDGs, that is, responsible consumption and production are our immediate response on behalf of many producing and consuming countries to the rapid growth of population and vegetable oil demand, while persistently trying to meet the global sustainability commitments. China has a significant role to play in continuously ensuring the supply of sustainable palm oil meets increasing demands in the marketplace, while at the same time addressing the health issues of its consumers. Thus, joint efforts with palm oil producing countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, together with major consuming countries like China, to collaborate and foster partnership in continuously meeting the demand for sustainable palm oil is becoming the accepted norm moving forward. The commitment of palm oil producing countries to supply sustainable palm oil, having been proven with the enactment of the Indonesian Sustainable Palm Oil Standard, ISPO, and the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil Standard, MSPO. Therefore, it is my hope that you will take advantage of this opportunity by listening to our key palm oil experts on what the future will be like for sustainable palm oil in China. I wish you a more successful webinar. Thank you very much once again. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yusof, for your introductory remarks. And I will echo that I think we're very lucky to have 3 leading academic and industry experts from China, from Malaysia, and from Indonesia. And it's my great privilege to introduce our first academic expert today from Southeast University in China, Professor Sun Guiju, Professor of Nutrition at the School of Public Health. Professor Sun obtained her PhD from Fudan University in 2001, and her main research areas are around nutrition and health, focusing on the relationship between oils and fatty acids and human health. She has published over 300 research articles, including more than 100 SCI publications. She's also currently the executive member of the Chinese Nutrition Society, vice president of Jiangsu Nutrition Society, vice chairman of the Nutrition and Functional Food Committee of the Chinese Nutrition Society. And she is a review expert of functional foods and new food raw materials for the Chinese government. It's my great privilege to introduce Professor Sun to discuss some of her research and findings around the nutritional characteristics of palm oil. Professor Sun.
Hey, thank you, Jeff. Let's share my screen. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay. I want to give my thanks to the CPOPC for the invitation. I come from Southeast University, China. The title of my talk is Nutritional Characteristics of Palm Oil. Firstly, let's see the proportion of fatty acid components in different edible oils. As all of us to know, the fatty acid content of palm oil is significantly different from that of other common edible oils. Its palmitic acid is high, and the saturation is higher, also high. In fact, the content of oleic acid in palm oil is also relatively high among vegetable oils. This picture shows that the ratio of sulfur, MOFA, and POFA of palm oil is similar to the lard. And however, this picture gives the percentage of SN2 fatty acid composition. The main fatty acid in SN2 position in MOFA is MOFA in palm oil, palm oil, while the main fatty acid in SN2 position is saturated fatty acid in lard. And in fact, in the olive oil, the fatty acid in SN2 position is also oleic acid. And this slide illustrates the same theme. So palm oil has a high content of saturated fatty acids, but what is the significance of SN2 position being unsaturated fatty acids? Let's see the metabolism of triglyceride. In the small intestine, palmitic acid at SN1 and SN3 positions of triglycerides is easily digested by enzymes, while the oleic acid at SN2 position is retained on glycerol monoester, which is easily absorbed into human body by intestinal mucosal cells and plays the role of monounsaturated fatty acid in the body. In the chapter 10 of WHO report, fat and fatty acid intake and metabolic effects in the human body, there was following description about the SN2 position fatty acids. Total cholesterol and lower density lipoprotein cholesterol raising effects of palmitic acid are lower for vegetable than animal sources because it is present predominantly in the SN1 and SN3 position as opposite to SN2 position as in animal fats such as lard. In addition, Palm oil contains about 1% trans components, including vitamin E, especially tocotrienols, and carotenoids, especially beta-carotene, phytosterol, coenzyme Q10, phospholipid, and squalene. As we know, all of these trans components have many effective on human body benefit effect, such as the tocotrienol and tocopherol has natural antioxidant, anti-cancer, anti-aging, and so on. And the beta-carotene can be transferred into the vitamin A and to play the vitamin A effect, and so on. As we know, after we understand the nutritional characteristics of palm oil, then let's see the safety and the high value of palm oil. Palm oil has recognized by WHO and FAO and meets the food safety standards of CAC. As a processing raw materials, palm oil is used in all aspects of food processing. It is widely used in the processing of many kinds of foods, such as instant noodle, potato chips, biscuits, margarine, cocoa butter, caffeine partner, and so on. Lastly, I want to introduce the our full researches on palm oil related to nutrition. These are the full researches of my group. First research is the effect of red palm oil on vitamin A deficiency. We conducted a comprehensive literature search. 9 randomized controlled trials, RCT, were included for taking meta-analysis. This meta-analysis demonstrated that red palm oil might be effective for preventing elevating vitamin A deficiency. Serum retinol is used to as indicator of vitamin A status. 6 studies measured retinol in 1,085 participants. The first place of 6 studies together showed significant higher serum retinol levels were exhibited following intake red palm oil versus placebo. In addition, we did the subgroup analysis. The subgroup analysis indicated that improvements in children and women were seen in red palm oil group versus placebo. And from this chart, we can see the result in the children is more effective. However, in women, there were no significant difference. So we can say that red palm oil may have great effects to improve vitamin A status and prevent vitamin A deficiency for children, not for women. 3 studies reported serum beta-carotene levels in 318 subjects. After meta-analysis and the random effects model was used, the results showed serum beta-carotene increased significantly by red palm oil intake. Our second study is about the relationship of palm oil and bauxite frozen vegetables. Correctly, the oxidative degradation of the extracted cooking oils was also evaluated, and the palm oil showed better oxidative stability than soybean oil. Let's see these pictures. These pictures show the oxidative stability of vegetable oils in samples. The black bar is for the palm oil, and the white bar is for the soybean oil. We used these two kinds of oil to cook broccoli and Chinese cabbage. Then stored them at -20 degrees Celsius. We detected the quality and oxidative stability indexes at 0, 6, 12 months. Our study indicated that the peroxide value, acid value, malondialdehyde, and aniline in palm oil increased less than those in soybean oil after 12 months at frozen status. We can see all the indexes of palm oil are lower than the soybean oil. On the basis of our finding from this study, palm oil was recommended as a good oil for the preparation of bauxite frozen vegetables to reduce adverse effects during long-term storage. Then let's see our third study. The third study is about effects on productive performance, egg quality, concentrations of yolk carotenoids. Red palm oil supplementation significantly improved the yolk egg color and increased the content of lutein, beta-carotene, and total carotenoids in egg yolk in some degrees. Dietary red palm oil could reduce serum triglyceride levels in laying ducks on chicken, as well as total cholesterol and triglycerides levels in egg yolk. Therefore, feeding of red palm oil can produce natural, healthy red yolk eggs. Our result indicated that the suitable red palm oil concentration in the feed is 2%. And this table shows the detailed data. Our fourth study is about the comparison of palm oil and olive oil on lipid profiles in human. We carry out 2 times 2 crossover trials for 2 months intervention with 2-week washout periods for comparing the effects of palm oil on olive oil on blood lipids. Our results indicate that palm oil and olive oil consumption has no significantly different effect on BMI, serum total cholesterol, lower density lipoprotein cholesterol, high density lipoprotein cholesterol, triglyceride, and ApoA, ApoB. Our result also indicated that palm oil and olive oil consumption had no significantly different effect on blood glucose, insulin, C-peptide, and HOMA-IR. To sum up, palm oil has its unique nutritional value, and residents should also have diversity in choosing edible oil, such as in the Chinese dietary guideline, we suggested to eat diversity foods. So we can suggest residents to eat diversity oil. Palm oil is also one of the choices of edible oil. It can be eaten alternately or simultaneously with other vegetable oils. That's all of my talk. Thanks. Okay, Jeff.
Professor Sun, thank you so much for the detailed explanation of your studies, which I think highlight very clearly how palm oil compares to animal fats, how palm oil compares very well to olive oil in terms of its nutritional impact, and then some of the benefits of the potential benefits of red palm oil for vitamin A deficiency in children, and also palm oil in the animal feed for the egg production industry. Thank you so much for illustrating these very positive examples of palm oil.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sundram. Dr. Sundram is a world-leading expert on palm oil with over 40 years experience in the industry, focused on palm oil in particular, from institutional and industry-related activities. His research includes various aspects of oils and fat processing technologies, nutrition, biomedicine, biomedical applications. He is a fellow of the International Professional Association, a past laureate at Stanford University's Technical Museum Awards. He's published extensively, recording more than 70 peer review outputs, in excess of 600 international conference presentations, and holds 21 patents. He has coordinated more than 170 research and consumer promotion projects on palm oil, and primarily looking at the nutritional and health, food and technology, sustainability, and conservational aspects. We're very grateful for Dr. Sundram to also share his expertise in the presentation today, looking at the favorable health and nutritional outcomes of palm oil and how it can meet these nutritional goals in China. Over to you, Dr. Sundram. You're on mute at the moment, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, Tan Sri. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you are. It's a pleasure to share some of the accumulated knowledge on palm oil over the years. And today, I've just titled the presentation as very simply as palm oil supports favorable health and nutritional outcomes. Next slide. Now, why are we saying this? Now, if you're looking at the effects of palm oil, you really have to go back to the 1990s when the issue of the effect of dietary oils and fats on cholesterol metabolism was made aware by none other than a famous gentleman, Ansel Keys. And the Keys-Hextad equation that thereafter followed became a mainstay of how the world viewed all oils and fats, particularly saturated fat, simply because this Keys-Hextad equation was able to predict your cholesterol changes, your blood cholesterol changes on a possible increase or decrease of the saturated fat content in your diet. This was countered by the content of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the diet as well. Now, during this period from the 1990s and up to the early 2000, the world has seen changing and soaring incidence of coronary heart disease and then diabetes. Now, as a result, a number of international guidelines have emerged, but all these guidelines have a key or the origin of what is known as the Mcgovern Commission in the United States and headed by a gentleman called Senator Mcgovern. Now, it's very interesting that for 5 decades, this commission's hearing became the mainstay of most of the dietary guidelines, particularly for oils and fats around the world. But unfortunately, what happened was that as a result of these guidelines and the goading from the food industry, particularly in the United States, the world today has seen a new epidemic, not the COVID, not the one that we are going through, but we are already seeing a diabetic epidemic, which is far more worse than the coronary heart disease challenges faced by humans previously. Next slide. Now, what has happened is that in the past 30 years, science has continuously researched the effect of saturated fats in the diet, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fatty acids. The origin of the fatty acids, as well as the quantity you eat, becomes very important in dictating your plasma cholesterol outputs and therefore your ultimate risk in heart disease. But these well-entrenched documentations took a major turn starting around 2005 and into 2010, when researchers all over the world, particularly those from the Harvard Medical School and elsewhere, began to relook at the data and suddenly realized that what they were looking for could have been an error. Saturated fat content was not being critically associated with the incidence of coronary heart disease and in fact incidence of mortality from coronary heart disease. As you know, coronary heart disease is a multifactorial disease. The risk factors are surmounting every day. Even as I talk, I count about 232 different risk factors. But look at this data. This is a meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And when they put all the major studies that looked into saturated fats and cholesterol metabolism, they found that the association between the intake of saturated fat and risk for coronary heart disease, as well as stroke in the population, could not be carried forward. Next slide. Now, this, next slide, this triggered a number of newer studies, and a number of them are now in the publication. On the left-hand corner, you see a study that came out of the Cambridge University, which actually reflected similar outputs as those from the Harvard Medical School, from Suetonio, etc. And as a result, if you scrutinize the scientific literature, you will see increasing evidence for the fact that saturated fatty acids or saturated fat consumption cannot be directly correlated to the incidence of coronary heart disease in any given population, and therefore we need to rethink this. Now, if you are interested in reading a little bit more detail in this, I've actually helped CPOPC put up a paper in the Journal of Oil Palm and Oil Palm Research, which is freely downloadable from the CPOPC website. And I will ask you to go and read the details there, please. Next slide, please. Now, what is happening now? Now, if you look at the 2021 US dietary guidelines, in the face of all this new evidence, you would have thought that the United States Dietary Guidelines Expert Committee would make the much needed change in advising dietary regimes to the American populations. Unfortunately, the 2021 dietary guidelines appear to reflect the same old concept that was 30, 40 years ago, that you want to reduce your saturated fat intake, increase your polyunsaturated fat, and even substitute it for monounsaturated fatty acids. To harden researchers in the system, this is a bit intriguing, because what the American Heart Association is actually trying to do is still trying to overcome the continued presence of partially hydrogenated fat, trans fatty acids in some of the foods in the American population. On the right, you see the two major studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine that says that well, any quantum of trans fatty acids that you and I consume are a danger, and they must be got rid of. Now, in many ways, palm oil has filled the gap for the partially hydrogenated fats. Next slide. And it is honestly, right now, it is the only dietary fat that can possibly replace partially hydrogenated fats and yet give the functionality to the products that it replaces, such as in margarines, in shortenings, in bakery fats, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, so what does this reflect for the Chinese population, or how does it dominate China's trend towards its oils and fats consumption? Now, if I looked at the data, China's consumption of oils and fats today is dictated by 5 major vegetables oil. The major consumed oil is actually soybean oil, 46%, followed by rapeseed. Palm oil, imported both from Indonesia and Malaysia, today account for 11% of China's overall consumption. And then the other 2 important consumption oils are sunflower and groundnut. Now, in addition to the 5 major oils, always remember that Chinese diet is very varied. It is historically, it's a traditional diet that is co-imposed by a variety of Chinese dietary habits that is very unique to the Chinese population. Now, despite all this, what we count today is, if we look at the per capita consumption of dietary oils and fats in China, it is reading at about 28 kgs per year per person, or about 76 grams of oils and fats per day. Now, this honestly sits very well into the recommended dietary fat intake, which is about less than 30 energy percent, which is often cited as the optimum quantity of fat for consumption. Now, I use this data to calculate what does a typical Chinese diet look like. The typical Chinese diet today is equated to about 27.6% energy as fat calories, which is still within the 30 energy percent optimum. Now, if I then computed the level of palm oil with the quantity of palm oil imported into China, it works out to about only 8.4 grams of palm oil per Chinese citizen per day, which is equivalent to about 3.1% of their energy intake. Now, the problem that the world tries to express against palm oil is that it is highly saturated. So it has definitely a high content of palmitic acid. Now, if I then calculated what is the SAFA contribution from this level of palm oil in the Chinese diet, it just accounts for a mere 1.5% of the saturated fat consumption, daily fat consumption in China, which is far low. Now, you'd be very surprised to say that everybody flags soybean oil as a polyunsaturated fat high in linoleic acid. But given the quantity of soybean oil that is consumed in China today, do you realize that soybean oil actually contributes more saturated fatty acids per day to the Chinese diet than the palm oil diet? So keep this in mind. Next slide, please. So next slide, what does this all mean? Now, there's a lot of evidence around the nutritional properties of palm oil, and Professor Sun talked about it. But in order to understand its relevance to human nutrition, I count about 38 major human clinical dietary trials that have actually compared palm oil with a variety of fats, saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated. These are the real indicators of how palm oil is behaving towards your blood cholesterol levels, or whether it increases or decreases. In this chart, I've actually narrowed down the consumption of palm oil and palmoline versus the monounsaturated oils and fats, such as olive oil, canola, rapeseed, and others. Now, in a meta-analysis of this kind, you see a midline running through the graph. And at the bottom, you see 2 diamonds. If the diamonds sit right at the midline, or they are either far north or far south of the midline, then the target fatty acid or fat that you are consuming has an effect on the parameters of interest. But here you see that you can substitute palm oil for any of the monounsaturated oils, and there is no change in blood cholesterol levels. What it equates is that palm oil is equal to olive oil, is equal to rapeseed oil, is equal to canola oil for its effects on blood cholesterol levels. And there are a host of individual studies already published in the literature that speak prominently about these effects. Next slide. Next slide. Now, the other question that is always posed to me is that, okay, what happens if you and I are continuously exposed to palm oil day in and day out? Do we put ourselves at risk for higher risk of coronary heart disease or other degenerative diseases? This was a burning question, and I partly looked at it in Malaysia, where we tracked a Malaysian population of about 600 people who in our tracking, we found people who had continuously consumed palm oil for about 15 years. And on a daily basis, they were consuming about 80% of their daily fat intake as palm oil. So if you look at it and equate it to China, this Malaysian population is already consuming 4 to 5 times the amount of palm oil that the Chinese are currently importing and consuming. That's typical in Malaysia. So what was the impact? Now, to measure the impacts in this study, we used rather sophisticated lipoprotein particle sizes, which are a step in advance to the normal LDL, HDL cholesterols that people usually measure. When we looked at it, we found that palm oil consumption over a duration of 15 years in this population at such high levels had no impact on the LDL particle sizes or the LDL concentration, and also on the total cholesterol and HDL cholesterol ratios, which a cardiologist will always measure as to measure your risk. What came out very strongly in this is that risk in the Malaysian population is measured by the quantity of carbohydrates, mainly the consumption of refined sugars that you and I consume in Malaysia. So if we are stupid in Malaysia to consume very high sugary content diet, then it is going to provide us a risk factor or an elevated risk factor. But with any amount of palm oil, you can see that where high fat, low carbohydrate diets, there is no impact. Now, this is a learning exercise, and it's beginning to add a lot of input to the literature. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, that was about effect of palm oil on blood lipids and lipoproteins. Just about 3 months ago, very recently, there was a lot of noise in the literature regarding palm oil and cancer, because there was a study published in Nature that shows that a mouse fed a diet high in palm oil resulted in pro-metastatic memory in some cells in the mice, and the media went to the hilt and said that you consume palm oil. Palm oil is high in palmitic acid, and it is a cancer risk. The first important thing to learn is that this was a mouse study. It is not applicable in the human scenario, not yet, but the scientific findings are relevant. But how relevant are they for you and me as humans? Next slide. Next slide. Now, there's always been a lot of interest about dietary fats and cancer. And I go back to 1975 to the late Ken Carroll, who I used to also work with. Now, on the left, he documented a relationship between the incidence of breast cancer in a given population. You see that a number of countries were tracked. And what is interesting in this graph is that you can see the Asian populations where low fat consumption was the norm, had lower incidence of breast cancer compared to the Western populations who were at that time consuming 40% of their dietary diet as fat and fat calories. A similar study has come out of Korea, where they looked at gastric cancer, and you can see the relationship between dietary fat intake and onset of gastric cancer or stomach cancer is not apparent in humans. Now, there are so many other examples relevant to the human scenario where cancer is concerned. Let's go forward. Next slide. Now, and then if you look very carefully in the literature, because palm oil was cited from an animal study, I can show you a number of other characteristics where sunflower oil, soybean oil, safflower oil have all been evaluated in mouse breast cancer models or rat breast cancer models, and they were shown to be pro-carcinogenic. And that does not mean those fats are actually triggering cancer. Now, there's also a strong evidence between the quantity of meat and processed meat products that we eat, and the diet has always played an important role in triggering certain pro-cancer events in your body and my body, and we have to be careful of that. So the evidence is very confounding, and I think the summary of the evidence will be, as we know today, next slide, is summarized very nicely in this slide, which is a very authoritative American Institute of Cancer Research guidelines for cancer prevention. Now, if you look at this very carefully, and I've looked at this over and over again, I simply looked at, is there anything that says about fat and saturated fat, about palm oil, or even other individual oils in this circle of evidence that has been put out by the American Institute of Cancer Research? There is not a single bit of evidence that associates palm oil, other saturated fatty acids, or other regular oils and fats we consume with cancer. So you must remember that. No doubt the media and the blog articles are very pronounced in this, but the scientific evidence is just not there. Next slide, and this will be my last slide. Now, as a result, in order to address the issue of palm oil and cancer, I put out this. The first thing, and this was published in some local media and on the internet, and again, you can have access to this on the CPOPC blog. The first thing that you need to remember is that palm oil does not initiate cancer. It is not an initiator of cancer. In other words, by eating palm oil, there is not a single ounce of evidence that you will develop cancer. Now, in many animal models, linoleic acid, which is found in soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, etc., has been found to be a trigger for the progression of certain cancers in animal models. But again, you cannot conclude that those are pro-carcinogenic, and therefore you should avoid. We do not advocate this. Now, because even with palm oil, we have published evidence that if you fed palm oil and compared it with soybean oil and etc., the incidence of cancer in the animal model is lower in a palm oil diet. And then another proof of evidence is Prof. Sun talked about carotenes and tocotrienols. Do you know that these carotenes and tocotrienols have potential anti-cancer properties? And we are very interested in this, but there's a lot of work going on. But even with all this evidence, I would say that we are not claiming palm oil to be an anti-cancer dietary fat, but we are simply saying that there is no danger to humans by the continued consumption of palm oil as part of their dietary regime. Let it be for the prevention of coronary heart disease, cancer, degenerative diseases, etc. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of evidence related to the health and nutrition aspects of palm oil. In fact, there are more than 300 publications in the literature. The literature is very mixed, so you have to filter the evidence, but the evidence, as I filter it and other researchers filter it, it says that palm remains a safe, versatile oil. And today, with the requirement to produce its sustainability, it meets the requirements of a sustainable edible oil for the world masses. I leave you with that, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Sundram, thank you so much for that in-depth assessment, highlighting perhaps how our thinking is a little outdated about the risks of high saturated fats and not looking at the comparison of palm oil to other oils around the impact on cholesterol levels, and also your comments on the relative risks of palm oil versus other fats in terms of cancer and seeing it as part of a sort of overall healthy diet. Thank you so much for that in-depth analysis. I know we have one or two questions coming in that we'll pick up in the Q&A session that we'll bring back to you. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Puspo Edi Giriwono, another leading expert who is currently the head of the Southeast Asian Food and Agricultural Science and Technology Center in Indonesia at the IPB University. And he's been at that university for over 10 years. Dr. Guerrano is also one of the members of the Functional Food Working Group under the Indonesia Ministry of Health. He also currently holds membership in the Indonesia Risk Assessment Center. He has a PhD in molecular nutrition and also focuses on, his research focuses on various aspects of bioactive functional compounds, on inflammation of regulated cellular signaling, and has published many papers on aspects of food and its impact on biology. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Puspo to share some observations and comments. I believe you have one or two slides you might want to share as well. Dr. Puspo, over to you, and thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's good to be here among the distinguished speakers. So at first I was just thinking that just my comments would do, but I'd like to visualize, I'd like to help audience to visualize what I'd like to comment upon. So these some of these slides should complement what the speakers have been presenting. So the first one is going back to, I totally agree with what the two speakers with excellent presentations. Just going back to sustainability, we'd have to look ahead. We'll have to look forward because of the world population growth. Some estimates are looking into 9 to 10 billion world population in the next 20, 30 years. With all these a number of people who needs feeding, then you'll have to have a lot of vegetable oil that needs to be supplied. And I think the speakers have mentioned that palm oil at the moment is probably one of the most sustainable because of its productivity. You can see here, if we visualize how much land it's needed to grow 1 ton of these vegetable oils, we can see that palm oil is probably the most productive. It requires 1/4 of a hectare here, for example. But how does that correlate? How can we visualize these productivity to what the world will need in about 30 years' time? So with that 225 million tons per year, this is how much land that would require to produce these amount of vegetable oil. So for example, with soy, then you probably have to grow half of the US land just for soy, just to produce that 225 million tons. With canola or rapeseed, then a lot of Europe will probably have to be converted into fields for these rapeseeds. But if you look at palm oil, because of its very high productivity, then we can see that it's just this much land basically to produce the same amount. So that is going back to our understanding of when we think about how do we supply demands for the future generation, for future populations, whether it's in China, whether it's throughout the world, then we'll have to look at these kind of productivity. So that's the first one. The next one is probably this one. So this is a simplification of what is inside those palm oil. We'll leave palm kernel out. It's slightly different. And this is from Dr. Sundram, 2003. So a lot of the focus, again, it's looking at just these palmitic acid saturated fatty acids. And I think one of the an audience asking the question with that 2021 paper a few months ago, last year, it was actually just looking at this palmitic acid and what the effects are on those tumoric cancerous breast cells from those animal models. But then if we have a look at what is inside that palm oil, we forget about this one. So these oleic acid, it's a very good omega-9 unsaturated fatty acids, and it counts for half. So it's very much balanced between the saturated fatty acids and also the unsaturated fatty acids. Now, where have we seen these kinds of unsaturated fatty acids, omega-9 oleic acid? And it goes back to what Dr. Sun has shown in her presentations. It's looking into olive oil, basically. So you can find that some of these data, so here I'm showing just a meta-analysis from 2019, that palm oil is just as good as any other oil. And in fact, if we compare it with olive oil, because it contains also high amounts of oleic acid, olive oil over 70%, palm oil is very balanced, then we can see that it shows very similar results here. You can see the diamond bar very close to the center. So again, we forget these kind of things, and it's a good idea, you know, with these kinds of webinars, with these kind of talks, it's going back into just exactly what is inside palm oil, because all these data doesn't show what we fear, but it shows otherwise because of these oleic acids. And just the last one, just to add on something. So it's about pediatric health, and we can see that if we look into human breast milk, we can see that the composition is actually quite high in saturated fatty acids, and also here again is palmitic acids. And again, I think everybody agrees that human milk for that first 3 to 6 months of infant childhood and growth is probably the best nutrition to give. And we can see that manufacturers, when they try to help mothers who cannot breastfeed, that would then rely on formula, then this is what the fatty acids of breast milk looks like. So this is what the profile looks like with its C18, C16, and so on. And this is what a mass-produced commercial formula looks like. And you can see the yellow bars. You will have to have palm oil added to these formula, so then it can resemble what is required from human breast milk for that 3 to 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding. So again, these are some of the things that I would like to add upon. In addition to, I totally agree with what the two speakers are saying. So here are some of the things that we can think about. And we'll have to try always to think about future generations, future populations, and how we can try to provide their needs. Okay, thank you for that. Over back to you, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Assel. Thank you.
Dr. Puspo, thank you for underlining some of the key points that were made and also highlighting another comparison in terms of the value of palm oil in infant powders as well. You mentioned the question, one of the questions we have was about the study by the Institute of Biomedicine in Barcelona that linked palm oil to increased cancer risks. The question is more general than that. Why is it that renowned scientists have differing research based on differing opinions of the relationship between palm oil and cancer? Maybe I can ask Dr. Sundram to respond to that. Why is some scientific research suggesting there is this link, and why do you and others not do so?
Thank you, Jeff. The approach itself is very complicated, and if you if anybody who's read the original paper will understand that what the research team was looking was to understand the mechanisms of how the cancer cells metastasize in a mammalian system or in the mice model here, and then they mapped out various molecular triggers and components that were fed or were facilitated, particularly by palmitic acid. Now, it does not mean here that only palmitic acid triggered the changes. It so happened that in the model that they tested, palmitic acid was more pronounced on the variables than other fatty acids, including oleic acid, linoleic acid, etc. These are very mechanistic studies. And the simple way to make people understand, if you're not in the science itself, is that understanding cancer and modeling cancer, let it be in humans, in animals, is very complicated. We have seen instances where we get wonderful results in cell culture systems, and then we carry it to whole animal models, and the whole evidence from the cell culture system is not reflected in the animal model. And again, what you see in an animal model may never ultimately be reflected in a human model. If it is, then the world is nearer to a possible cure towards cancer. That is the goal. So the whole approach is very complicated, and we should not interfere with the scientific complications, because complications will ultimately, I hope, yield the results that make cancer less damaging than it is currently today. I hope that helps. It's not a complete answer, but I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Professor Sun and maybe our other distinguished guests to jump in as well. We've heard a lot about the benefits of palm oil in terms of yield, in terms of its productivity, performance, in terms of its stability. As Professor Sun's study elaborated around frozen foods and maintaining its stable environment for a long time, and its versatility we've heard about. What do you see, Professor Sun, as the prospects for palm oil, given Dr. Sundram sort of compared where it is now in terms of other palm oil, other oils in the food supply chain? What's the likely growth prospect, size and scale of growth given China's needs over the next 5 to 10 years? Professor Sun?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. And I think I have reminded many dietary guideline suggested to eat diversity foods. I think in Chinese Nutrition Society, we want to suggest to eat different edible oil, soybean, olive oil, and flower oil, flower seeds oil, and so on. I think especially the palm oil, because the palm oil saturated fatty acids is higher than common palm oil. So the palm oil, I ate a different situation. I want to suggest to use the cooking oil. In China, the cooking oil use is higher maybe than other countries, because the Chinese foods, almost every vegetable, meat, fish, we firstly put some oil and to fry it. So the cooking oil use is higher than other countries. So in the future, I think different, because the fatty acids contains profile in different edible oil is different, and the nutritional value is different also. So the resident controls different edible oils to provide the different fatty acids. So and another thing I want to when I went to Malaysia, I discussed it with the MPOB scientist. I want to say the red palm oil, I think, is a good choice because the red palm oil contains more vitamin E and beta carotene. So the red palm oil may be used to for cooking. So I hope the red palm oil can be appear in the Chinese supermarket. However, now no red palm oil in the supermarket. And other things, you know, with the economic development in China, the different edible oil, maybe especially some small kind, such as peanut and flaxseed and olive oil, the consumption is increasing with the economic development. So my opinion or my suggestion is to suggest residents eat diversity of edible oil. Thank you.
To you, Professor Sun, we have another question. Specifically, you mentioned about the red palm oil and its benefits in terms of vitamin. Is there any possibility in China for using palm oil as a source of vitamin A and vitamin E?
Okay, if the red palm oil can be sold or can be in the supermarket, that may be. You know, Chinese Nutrition Society have cooperated project with MPOB. We use the red palm oil to produce biscuits and give the children in Gansu province that area to give the children to eat these biscuits and prevent to increase the retinol content of these children of their serum. So maybe that's a good choice. Okay.
Thank you. I have one other question, maybe to Dr. Sundram, and maybe Dr. Puspo wants to answer. What should we do to counter, what should CPOPC do and others do to counter these negative campaigns? What more can we do to get the message out there about the positive aspects that may be being dismissed by some parts of the scientific community, perhaps in the European Union and elsewhere? What more can we do to highlight these positive aspects?
Dr. Puspo, do you want to go first?
All right, thank you. Okay, so just perhaps a brief comment from me. I think it's education and communication such as this. We have to do more when it comes to how do you communicate to the general public, how do you translate what the scientific data shows, and also how do you look into the perspective. For example, a lot of those headlines are probably like palm oil cancer. But then when we look into the paper directly, it's actually nitpicking what parts of palm oil, palmitic acid, for example, and then it shows a correlation with some of these cancers' growth. So it's going back to educating everyone, basically. Palm oil is not just palmitic acid, it contains a lot more than that, and so on. So it's, again, just like we work in schools, in universities, every single year we'll have to deal with new students and we'll have to explain the same thing over and over again. It's a bit boring for us, but then it's something that we have to do to get the message across, basically. So that's from me. Thank you.
Dr. Sundram, anything else?
I think it's a complicated task, and that's what CPOPC and even MPOC has been doing over the years. Now, if you look at it from the scientific community views today, there's a changing trend and understanding regarding dietary fats and their association with degenerative diseases, and in that palm oil is included. I think that group, if provided with the correct peer-reviewed scientific evidence, are easier to change, and they will adopt the best scientific principles in order to have an opinion, right or wrong, about palm oil and its health nutritional effects. The biggest danger today is with the media and the social media. The number of food bloggers who pen out thousands of opinions, not only on palm oil, on everything where they think that they can attract readership and attention to their own blog articles is a curse that we have to deal with, because correcting them is not easy, and some of them are very stubborn in the sense that they are not eager and ready to receive that information. So that's a task that CPOPC, the producing countries and others have to look into more critically. But that also means putting a lot more funding in order to educate the consumers. And the final group to me, which has always been a big question mark, are actually the professionals in the medical community. The problem I always say, and I'll say it out loud again, I say that doctors, once they leave the medical schools, often, most of them, not all of them, most of them stop reading. And what they have learned in medical school is carried over, and they advise their patients accordingly. And I find that, for example, in Malaysia, when we talk to the doctors and give them the scientific opinions on palm oil supported by science-based publications, then you see a change in the attitude of those doctors who have been exposed to such literature. But then there's also those who have not yet been reached out to, and they continue to hold the negative opinions about palm oil. So it's a very daunting challenge. It cannot be overcome in a year or two. It hasn't been, we haven't been able to completely overcome it in the past 30 years. And that's an effort that must continue and cannot be neglected in any way whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm conscious we're over time, and I know there's one or two other questions. So maybe I'll just ask one more, and then we'll hand over to final remarks. Professor Sun, it's for you. It says, does China have any R&D plans to increase its own domestic palm oil production in the coming years that you're aware of?
Indeed, this question, I think I cannot answer because, I'm just a professor in university. However, I know we have some in maybe, I think, Hainan province and to produce the oil palm. However, the palm oil from that area to produce the palm oil is very low. The amount is very low. So I don't know. I'm sorry because okay. I'm not
we covered it in our previous.
I'm not a police here, so I don't know. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We covered it in our previous webinar in China, where it was explained that the land available of the right kind of vegetation and so on in China is very limited compared to the vast amount that's available in Indonesia and Malaysia. So it would only be on limited amount.
Yeah, maybe.
Thank you so much for every question. I know there's one or two other questions and comments that we will feed back to the CPOPC team, and I must really thank the group. I'd like to hand over to Mr. Dupito Simamora, who will provide some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Jeff. In our discussion, I think it was very clear that the speakers once again highlighted, that sustainable palm oil is safe to consume, that palm oil has clear advantages compared to other oils, and that the application of palm oil in food has proven benefits and nutritional value. Professor Sun suggested that palm oil can be eaten alternately or simultaneously, but if we add sustainability to the equation, then perhaps sustainable palm oil would be or should be the best choice for China and the world at large in the future. Studies conducted by Dr. Sundram and elsewhere have proven that palm oil consumption cannot be associated with cancer, coronary heart disease, and other diseases. In Dr. Sundram's words, palm oil does not initiate cancer. In his comment as a discussion, Dr. Puspo also explained palm oil consumption and health and also nutritional needs, including infant formula. Dr. Puspo did not forget to mention the sustainability advantages of palm oil in terms of productivity, that perhaps the best alternative to meet the increasing demand if we should preserve the environment to the best we can. Based on the presentations and the discussion, I of the belief that palm oil positive campaign based on science should be the norm, and the practice CPOPC should do more and more in the future. Studies and advocacy campaigns should go hand in hand. More studies are needed, and perhaps CPOPC can consider to initiate a joint study with Professor Sun and her team in China, as we know that China is one of the major consuming countries for palm oil. Finally, allow me to sincerely thank Professor Sun Guiju, Dr. Kalyana Sundram, Dr. Puspo Edi Giriwono, participants, APCO, and also CPOPC Secretariat team for our important discussion this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the day and stay safe all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for our distinguished experts. Bye-bye.